Standards, annexed by the Special Rapporteur on Contemporary Form of Racism, Racial Discrimination, Xenophobia, and Related Intolerance, Ms. Ashwini, you have the floor.
Okay. Yes. Thank you, Madam Chair. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, it is an honor again to present before the General Assembly. I would like to begin by thanking states for their cooperation with my mandate throughout this year, including all those who have submitted information to inform my reports. I would also like to thank the member states who responded positively to my request for country visits, including Austria, which I will visit between 2nd and 9th December this year. Today, I present two reports to this Assembly. My first report is on conflict and racial discrimination. The report explores the multidimensional interconnections between conflict and racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance. It is timely and important to examine the dynamics between conflict and racial discrimination. And in the recent years, violent conflict has intensified and human rights-related impact is severe and has caused devastating and lasting harm. The escalation in global conflict has been disturbing, and the impact of conflict has been disproportionate, with those from marginalized racial and ethnic groups all too often being subjected to the most severe and irreparable consequences. As recognized by the Durban Declaration and Program of Action, the interconnection between racial discrimination, including systemic racism and violent conflict, and its consequences are complex and multidimensional. My report presents analysis of some of the ways in which racial discrimination and conflict are interconnected. It describes how anti-racial discrimination measures a significant role in conflict prevention and protection. Additionally, it also examines how early warning systems that integrate racial and ethnically disaggregated data can trigger timely and effective responses, which can help to prevent conflict or reduce its length and intensity. My report highlights the new manifestations of violence during the conflict in the background of technology, and it elaborates the impact of racist hate speech and digital technologies in conflict situations. The report also focuses on the disproportionate impact of conflict on racially and ethnically marginalized groups, including with respect to civilian casualties, aid blockages, sexual and gender-based violence, and forced displacement. This is undoubtedly due to the vulnerabilities arising from the positionality and experiences of pre-existing systemic racism and intersectional discrimination, which are often legacies of enslavement and or manifestation of past or ongoing colonialism, occupation, and apartheid. My report also outlines the important integration of racial justice, consideration into peace, reconciliation, and justice processes. I stress that addressing conflict-related human rights violations in a lasting manner and remedying impunity also requires a systemic approach that acknowledges, addresses, and remediates colonialism, enslavement, and apartheid as grave human rights violations and also as major drivers of conflict. The powerful and destructive interconnectedness of conflict and racial discrimination contravenes both equality and non-discrimination and the maintenance of international peace and security as foundational norms of United Nations and the post-World War II international order and international law. The status quo whereby conflict and racial discrimination reinforce one another, deepening the exclusion of and the harm to racialized groups is not acceptable, and there should be an end to it, and there needs an increasing investment in anti-racism and conflict prevention and resolution. As interconnected and mutually reinforcing goal is vital and highly crucial. Excellencies and distinguished delegates, in this context of conflict, we cannot overlook the serious situation unfolding in Sudan. The ongoing conflict in Sudan exemplifies the devastating intersectionality between systemic racism, gender-based violence, and protracted security concerns. There is substantial evidence to prove the pattern of racialized violence, sexual violence by rapid support forces, where violence has been weaponized to assert control and displace entire communities. States have legal duties to act upon, and the report calls on them to exercise restraint in all conflict situations, ensure unrestricted humanitarian access, and uphold international humanitarian law, particularly the prohibition of starvation as weapon of war. And I would like to emphasize the protection must go beyond physical safety and prioritize conflict mitigation. Lastly, addressing the roots of Sudan's crisis requires confronting the legacies of colonialism, colonial exploitation, and systemic exclusion that have long structured inequality. And I would like to reiterate the importance of reparatory and redistributive policies that can prevent future reoccurrence. My report also is concerned over the deliberate obstruction of humanitarian aid and the racialized denial of essential services in Gaza. Such practices, including the use of starvation as weapon of war, are grave violation of humanitarian law, and today racism and racial discrimination against Africans, anti-Palestinian racism underpins the normalization of civilian suffering, and the persistence of occupation, apartheid structures, and systemic discrimination continues to dehumanize people across Palestine and Sudan. My report concludes by making serious recommendations to states and other actors about how to address racial discrimination and conflict, and I urge states to effectively implement these recommendations and those of other racial justice mechanisms on this important subject. My second report is on combating the glorification of Nazism, neo-Nazism, and related ideologies submitted pursuant to General Assembly Resolution 78/190. My report on combating the glorification of Nazism expresses concerns about the continued prominence of racist, nationalist, and far-right political parties and organizations operating throughout various national contexts. In response to such trends, my report highlights the relevant provisions within the international human rights law, including Article 2 and Article 4 of the International Convention on Elimination of Racial Discrimination, as well as the provisions in other treaties, including the prohibition of incitement to racial hatred contained within the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. My report recommends that member states take a number of measures to address concerning prominence of different manifestations of hatred and stresses the importance of improving relevant national legal framework and in adopting national action plans to combat neo-Nazism. I also call on states to strengthen and expand efforts to employ education and public awareness campaigns to combat racism, racist stereotypes, and promote diversity. My report highlights the importance of increasing disaggregated data collection and augmenting efforts to implement relevant international legal provisions, including the International Convention on Elimination of Racial Discrimination and Durban Declaration and Program of Action. Lastly, as a special procedures mandate holder, I unconditionally denounce the United States government's sanction on the Special Rapporteur on the occupied Palestinian territory. I express my unconditional solidarity with Ms. Francesca Albanese. Sanctioning a special rapporteur appointed by the Human Rights Council violates the international law and is a direct attack on the integrity and ethos of the United Nations human rights system. And this sanction against Ms. Albanese undermines the credibility of the special procedures as a whole and threatens the fundamental principles of impartiality, multilateralism, and respect to the United Nations human rights framework. I urge all states to take a firm and principled stance in rejecting and denouncing these sanctions and to refrain from implementing or recognizing them in any form. And I thank you for your kind attention and look forward to having a constructive dialogue.
I thank the Special Rapporteur on Contemporary Form of Racism, Racial